Good afternoon to everyone. So we've saved the best panel to last, and there's only us and one other keeping you between us and the beers and wine afterwards as well. Before I introduce the panel, I suppose it's almost worth giving, I suppose, a quick synopsis of I suppose, the state of the nation really on VR. And I suppose after 2016, which was a much hyped year, we had big product launches. There's so many announcements left, right, and centre across the sector. That's what I want to really cover today as well. Is that interest, is that focus continuing in 2017? Are we still seeing the same level of development across the hardware and also across the content? And perhaps maybe it's slightly unfair on VR in that it's actually growing up very much in the public eye. So much press attention attached to it. But when you look at some of the other sectors, comparable sectors, then they've almost become stealth for so many years before they gain that commercial traction, and then away they go. So maybe we are doing a slight injustice. Some of the early measurements taking place. But I think long term, there's a number of data points being thrown around. Some more conservative, some more aggressive than others as well. And maybe I want to get from the panelists today their viewpoint and maybe the realistic viewpoint, and as opposed to some of the hype that's taking place in this marketplace. So before we kick into the questions, maybe as a start point, maybe we'll start with you, Steve. Just maybe a quick introduction to yourself and you come.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for having me along today. Pleasure to be sitting with fellow panelists. I'm the COO and co-founder of a company called Melody VR, and we're launching the destination platform for music in virtual reality. We've been in the space for just over 3 years now, and during that time, I'll take it back a step, we basically founded the business with the simple vision of allowing a fan and an artist to engage in an entirely new medium, and never sort of detracting from the live industry, having had a very live music background, but for the simple reasons if someone couldn't afford to get somewhere, they weren't old enough, they geographically couldn't get there, or something had sold out, all of a sudden there was a new form of technology which could allow all of those problems to be solved overnight. During the last 3 years, we've worked, to give you some context how aggressive we've been in the space, we've worked with over 530 international recording artists, ranging from The Who to James Bay to Jason Derulo to the London Symphony Orchestra to just about everything in between. We've curated the world's largest virtuality music library. It's north of 4,000 hours. And we've also basically tied up and entered exclusive partnership agreements, 73 in total now, with different venues, events, festivals, brands around the world, where we're the only company that will capture, curate, distribute and exploit their VR for anything between 5 and 25 years. When we launch the service, it's hardware agnostic, so we're privileged enough to be working with all of the key players, which I'm sure we'll all touch on in a bit more detail. But yeah, in essence, the destination platform for music in VR.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Carl?
Yeah, I'm Carl Woolley. I work for Framestore, which is a 30-year-old traditional visual effects company. We actually started off making some of the world's finest 80s pop videos, and have slowly moved from pop videos to TV commercials to feature films. And over the last 10 years, and I've been with the company for 13 years, we've worked on IPs like the Harry Potter franchise, the Bond movies, Gravity, lots of different commercial spots, some of which you'll love, some of which you'll probably hate. And over the last 10 years, we've really been focusing on digital, and I say digital kind of work. It's quite difficult to distinguish between what's a digital platform and what's a non-digital platform. And really, over the last 4 years, the VR studio, which I run in London, has grown from 2 or 3 people kind of doing some VR because we wanted to explore it. We'd actually been using VR in the background under the radar for 2 or 3 years before that on Gravity to help visualize some of the shots that Alfonso wanted to create. And we've now grown to, I would say, about 40 to 50 people working across projects for our traditional commercial clients to our film clients to some unannounced, more theme park-esque things coming along. Lots of VR arcades popping up. So we kind of, at the moment, the community is relatively small. Everyone seems to, you'll always be on a panel with someone that you know, if not all of them. And that includes some of the hardware manufacturers too. But there's lots of different touch points that I see for VR at the moment, not just the the tech-focused things, and just to touch on the point that Sarah made earlier about TV and 3D TV and VR, I think the clear distinction I would make, and I'm not saying that I back the Goldman Sachs report that it's going to be bigger than TV by 2020. I think that's hugely ambitious. But, you know, 3D TV was an evolution of an existing format, and VR is something completely different. So you can see why they'd get judged side by side, but fundamentally, one is a completely different medium.
Great, thanks, Ignacio.
So hi everyone. Thanks for having me also here. It's an honor. So my name is Ignacio. I work for Google Play, in fact. So basically, in my role, in my day-to-day role, I'm helping gaming developers, more precisely, to succeed with their Android apps, and basically helping them to distribute these apps across the platform. And why I came here is also because, as part of my role, I'm helping not only mobile 2D developers, but also like 3D and across like the new platform that we launched last year, which is Daydream. And so basically, I'm in contact with the gaming developers here in EMEA, in Europe, that they are actually working on VR games and publishing them in the Daydream platform. So yeah, so excited.
Great, thanks, Ignacio. And finally, Scott.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me here today. So I'm Scott Francis from THX, and for 40 years, THX has been the voice of quality for entertainment content. Starting out in the theaters, assuring that theaters are up to snuff and performing properly, and in more recent times doing technology invention to bring things along in the consumer electronics, as well as certifying those consumer electronics. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of Razer, the gaming company, and also the makers of the OS VR headset. And VR has been a particular area of interest of mine since joining THX. And we have focused on certifying some third-party hardware, most recently the ODG R9 AR glasses, certified for cinema mode, which enforces color quality, brightness, luminance, and we're working towards audio standards in AR as well, although that's probably what you know THX most for.
Great, thanks, Scott. Great. So kicking off with, I suppose, a work question. Steve, we were on a panel together, I think it was October, and I think you had 3,000 hours of content. I did another 1,000 as well. So I think from your perspective, obviously, there is still continued momentum, continued investment as well.
Yeah.
Do you think it's still an industry-wide collective, or do you think, are we starting to see some hesitance by some players in the market?
No, I mean, we're obviously heavily invested in the space, and I think if anything, the complete polar opposite, for continuation from 2016. I guess we sit in quite a unique place in that we fund all of our content creation. We were fortunate enough to take the company public just over a year ago with the sole vision of raising finance to build out these partnerships, fund content creation. No, I mean, I personally see it's completely the opposite. I think VR is certainly on that point of tipping the scales from early adopters and gaming into a more widespread entertainment format. And from on a personal level, that's where we saw music playing a huge part. I think what everyone does on this panel today is hugely important to the ecosystem, and I think we're starting to see that hockey stick effect of monthly active users. I think when we sat on the last panel, we were sitting around about 1 million monthly active users. We've surpassed 7.5 million now. I see that being, again, reports out there of 25, 30 million by the end of the year. And I think with initiatives such as Samsung and Microsoft coming into the space and Google Daydream carrying on driving everything they're doing, I think we'll see those numbers well achieved.
Great, interesting, yeah. So I suppose linking on from that as well, this this continued development and the roadmap as well. Ignacio, I'll come to you first, but maybe Scott, I think it'd be interesting to get your viewpoint on this as well. Is much of the, I suppose, a lot of the, I suppose the public talk was around about the hardware development initially, and rightly so, how to get into the consumer's hands to begin with as well. How do you see that developing in the short term now? What do you think needs to be like the next stage of I suppose the easy wins on the hardware side to actually start to get the more the consumer drive?
Yeah, so I guess effectively when you're developing for a platform, a new platform like VR, hardware is the way also to reach the audience, because you need the Daydream viewers, or you need whatever, like OEMs, and also the partnerships that we are launching with Samsung, or the standalone device that is going to be also released like end of the year with Lenovo and HTC. So all the hardware is going to enable that audience to reach out. And then there's the question, like, what comes first? Is it the content that is going to drive the the hardware sales, or is it actually the hardware and then the content will come along? But things that I see as the drivers, so definitely content is one of them. So better content, that's one key factor, and that's why, for example, in my case, I'm working to build better content and learn how you can actually create better games that reduce motion sickness and all the troubles that you might have in VR. Then I'd say consumer awareness, that's also a key indicator. I think the fact that people is more aware of VR. They had the first VR experience and then they actually want to buy a hardware. Technology would be something also very interesting. So I would say that would be the third. Technology when we're referring like obviously improvements in performance, high-end devices, for example, and Daydream needs certain quality or certain minimums in terms of the specifications of the phone. And then I'd say lastly is the price. So obviously price point is a critical one. So those four things are kind of like drivers. I would say that is, in my opinion, drivers of hardware and we'll actually see like an improvement in hardware sales once we actually get to this.
Yeah. Thank you. Great. Scott, anything to?
Yeah, I would shift that around slightly and saying that really content is going to be king on this. That it has to be some type of a killer app, and it's not going to be repurposing theatrical content. Gaming is already in its own lane and is already pursuing on its own path, and that's awesome. The music content is interesting. It could be something else completely different. My personal belief is it's going to come from industrial applications first, educational, utilitarian, inspection, something closer to an augmented reality rather than a full virtual reality system, which gets a large number of systems deployed, gets the cost down, helps drive up the quality of the hardware, the capability of the hardware. If every mechanic and postal carrier had some type of a glass system, what would they do with it in the off hours? That's then going to drive the secondary market of app development, which will cause the breakout.
Interesting, great. So content is king. We have a content creator. Oh, there's a couple of content creators. A couple of content creators there as well. If I come to you, Carl, first I think on this as well is that there is a lot of content out there. An abundance of content as well, with the majority being free. And I think as analysts, one of the questions we always first get asked, so I'll ask you as a response to this, is we're now at the tipping point of sort of actually paid-for models starting to come into play. Contents get longer, it's more higher budget, and we're moving, I suppose, away from almost like that test bed, throwing and seeing what sticks on the wall. Where do you see, the content development community being at that stage of, how close to the edge of the cliff are we before we start to see an abundance of paid-for services?
I mean, I guess what you're asking is, are we at the point now where people feel comfortable enough to produce content that they think they can charge for, as opposed to tech demos shared on Dropbox? Firstly, I'll speak from kind of our Framestore's point of view on that. So our point of view is, as a business that traditionally services clients, be they Warner Brothers or McDonald's, we will more than likely for those kind of clients be producing content that is part of a marketing activation in the traditional sense. However, we're also doing work, we can't talk too much about, which is planned for perhaps a subscription basis or a pay-per-view kind of scenario, or in something like we've recently kind of made some ways into China, and there's a big VR arcade scene there where the technology is most prevalent and manufactured. The problem there is they want content and they want quality content, and they're coming to European and North American studios to produce stuff that people are saying, we love this, we want to do more, but there isn't enough. The problem from a development point of view, which is an exciting thing and also a bit of a problem, is every 3 months or 6 months or 6 weeks in between, there's a new platform, or there's a new controller, or there's a new headset, or it's very difficult at the moment. We're constantly, the best experience now will not be the best experience in 6 months' time, because You know, Vive has just added the new audio head strap, and it's much more comfortable. But in 6 months' time, in time for Christmas, you'll more than likely be able to buy the wireless version of that with the new lighthouses, which will allow you to roam around as far as you want to. So then goalposts shift again.
Yeah.
When you're producing content for a rectangle, the rectangle might have more pixels or a higher frame rate or more color depth, but you're still making a rectangle. So
Yep.
it's a harder challenge. So I think, I guess smaller development studios might be more nervous to produce outside of paid mobile VR content, because that is more than likely in the short term to be a screen with a controller, as opposed to full VR content that's non-console based, where you could walk around and you could pick objects up and track them. So I think there's two different things, but I think the confidence is there. I mean, the E3 announcements from the past couple of days show that the bigger guys are now producing content, not just short little marketing things. So that's quite promising, I think.
Yeah, so major commitments starting to be seen across the board as well. And I suppose that comes back to the point, you know, you talk about, you know, the high-end sets, the Vives and Rift as well. But I suppose at the moment, you know, if you actually look at the numbers, you know, we're still talking low levels of hundreds of thousands for the Vive and the Rift, and we just hit 1 million on the PSVR as well. I think Ignacio, you mentioned that the price point on the hardware, particularly at the high end as well. Obviously, that is a limiting factor at the moment as well. But do you think that will always remain at the high end a limiting factor? And maybe Scott, maybe it might be a good one for you to pick up on this first to begin with, please, as well. Is that, do you see the quality at the low end increasing significant enough to actually make not necessarily the high end redundant, but to give that higher quality experience at the low end?
Yeah, I think a lot of this worry about the price is something premature. I mean, we've seen this in countless consumer electronics markets. Moore's Law itself is, what, 50 years old now? I mean, you're going to start at the high end, develop the experience, develop the vision and the capabilities at the high end, and the technology will trickle it down. We're getting to a point where Moore's Law is preparing to invert, making every device kind of ubiquitously computing, kind of the fog and fabric of computing of the universe. And at that point, the headset, whether it's headset or goggles or whatever the form factor ends up being, or as it changes in the future, becomes really just the display surface. Computing will be ubiquitous. So the costs right now, you know, I almost think we're not paying enough, right? I'd like to see a $10,000 headset. I want to see a $50,000 haptic suit, right? I want to see development pushing on that end, so that in 5 years, that's available as a consumer product for $1,000. I mean, not to pick on Google, but how much does a Pixel cost, right?
less than an iPhone, the most popular phone on the planet. So
iPhone is in my notes, but Google sat down.
So I suppose, you know, Ignacio, maybe to pick up on that.
Maybe just to add on that. So my point on price, obviously, we all know that Moore's Law is there, and once the technology is already widespread and users are using it, like, prices will go down, that's for sure. Like from a Google perspective, what we approached it was in a kind of like in a different way. You already have that amazing device in your pocket, and then we started with this kind of like exercise, which was cardboard, which in the end resulted to be very successful. And actually, many people had their first experience in VR through their own Android phone, and just like a piece of cardboard, and using that, especially for example now, like I think it's in the education sector, or like with the experiences. So, but then we realized that people were labeling as a low quality VR, and actually with the high-end devices, which you already have in your pocket, because Samsung S8 is going to be enabled for Daydream, or like the Pixel, you also already can have like a pretty, like very, very premium experience, and that's why the Daydream project is started. So it's kind of like meant to just cost you only the viewer, which I think it's £60 here in the UK. So which is a very accessible entry, or like the barrier of entry is very, very low to kind of like what we consider a high premium VR experience. So that's kind of like what we'll enable. So it's again reinforcing the theory that price it shouldn't be, and then it would be content that is driving. And in regards of content, I do believe that now we are in a wave, in a second wave, like the early explorers. And there's, agree with you, together with E3, there's been an even before, like there's a number of games that they were already like high quality AAA content. Archon, I think it's a VR. Also I think the Battlefront, it was more an experience, but it was really indeed very, very high quality, and some others like Werewolves Within Us. So there's a number of games already available that they were available last year, and they are really serious exercises in VR. So.
Interesting, yeah. And Carl, maybe coming to you, like linking to that content, I suppose, the gaming world of content as well. I think last time we sat together on a panel, you say it's a small industry, everyone seems to sit together a lot on this. Well, I think it was, you know, quite a big chunk of your team were actually games developers creating video content because of that as well. So I suppose, you know, almost, is it not necessarily a walkthrough, but just, you know, I think some of the interesting insight there is to the curation of almost this new platform of entertainment created by VR. You know, it's not necessarily video, it's not necessarily games, it's somewhere in between. So I suppose that linking that back to the opportunities that arise from VR, how do you see that type of, I suppose, you know, that system evolving, and how that can be created and used by, let's say, you know, the traditional video industry? How do they look to use more of an interactive experience on that, and where can it go?
That's an interesting question. I think, you know, when we started doing this, and I think we're 1,700 people as a business now, we were probably, I don't know, 1,400 people, all with a very similar skill set of creating computer graphics that took, you know, 90 hours, say, for a frame to render on Gravity. And now what we're looking at is having to render 90 frames in VR in a second. So the skill set, whilst it feels very similar, is completely different. So, you know, fortunately we're 2 or 3 doors down from Sony's base. So that proved quite useful in the early days. Yeah. But it is quite often you'll sit and it's not a game or it's not a filmic piece. And I think if we separate what we're talking out as VR from 360 video, it is somewhere in between. And I kind of liken it, when we were talking about the technology focus earlier, it will be something we won't even think about in 5 to 10 years now. I think like the very best experience you can get is a bit like going to Quasar or Laser Quest compared to running around your back garden with a Nerf gun. In terms of like the VR arcades and what they can offer. It's tricky though, it's a learning curve. The games people have the best experience, you know, which is why it was interesting to see them kind of wait a while before they all got into bed with it, because games development costs a lot more than film development. So the fact that they're making these significant investments is hugely promising.
Interesting. Great, yeah. So I suppose linking on from, you know, what works in terms of you know, genres, etc. as well. I suppose, you know, business models, and Carl, you've already touched on it. You know, like, I suppose, you know, reading between the lines of subscription versus pay-per-view. Now, Steve, obviously, you come to market with, you know, the subscription model, and I suppose it will be very much dependent on the type of content, you know, whether it is a pay-per-view. But do you think there's almost this potential earlier win with a pay-per-view, bite-sized chunks, which will maybe potentially grasp people's attention more?
Yeah, just to take it back one step, we haven't come to market yet, and we haven't done subscription. I mean, it's, I guess if I might sort of split our platform into 3 parts, I might just quickly jump back to content and then make it relevant to that. We've approached it in sort of 3 key parts, I guess. Siloed, but also very much crossed over. Obviously, we've built the recorded library, whereby we've been likened to the iTunes of VR. You can find your favourite artist and you can go back to a historical show. You know, there's a huge appetite. You know, we keep coming back to content, and people want content, and a lot of the stuff that's out there at the moment is very demo-esque. There's nothing that, you know, the industry sees from a hardware perspective as a reason why someone's going to come back day after day after day to consume VR tech or VR content. So, you know, recorded certainly for us was an important part of the business, and it will remain so. But something that we launched not long after our main launch is live virtual reality ticketing and digital streaming. So in essence, the second physical tickets sell out to a show anywhere in the world, you can switch to a digital ticket with a limitless capacity. And that's a really exciting proposition for the record industry. To give you some context on, you know, supply and demand, in 2007, the Guinness World Record is the Led Zeppelin gig at the O2. 20,000 physical tickets were applied for in excess of 20 million times. The average ticket was changing price for £8,000 a ticket. the most expensive 2 front rows went for £88,000. And that for fans, artists, and rights holders is actually a major problem. The secondary ticket market is not is not a fan of any of the rights holders. It doesn't go to the right people's pockets. But also for artists that have been writing for 12, 18 months, stuck away in a recording studio in their room, when tours sell out and Adele and Ed in 3 minutes, it's actually a problem for the industry. So we see what we've done from a live perspective as hugely exciting, and we think there's certainly a VR on demand, a digital ticket model there. The third part of us, we've stepped into the full interactivity. So, the real album samplers where you can bring people's albums alive, a mixture of 360 VR and everything in between. But I think for us, we touched on it, that the market is in its infancy. There's a real cry out for good content and a good service. I think the model we launch with will inevitably adapt and change very quickly. But we've worked tirelessly hard with the major record labels. We've recently closed global framework deals with Universal Music and Warner Music, and we're in great active talks with Sony. So we represent 100% of the licensed music space in VR. And as all, the way that our business is structured, we're also one of the rights holders in that content. So we're all actively invested alongside all of the hardware companies that have spent billions of dollars creating this tech. We want it in people's hands now. So I think the models will evolve. I think some sort of a la carte VR on demand certainly makes sense. Some form of subscription model, and then obviously the live ticketing. I think it's a nascent market. It's fun times
exactly.
ahead.
Very much in the experimentation. So
If I could add one thing on that, I think one of the things that might be missing in terms of business model, given that a lot of the content is demo or marketing, or the consumer is the product rather than purchasing the product. What might make sense as a business model, some type of hardware as a service or bundled subscription, right? Where you future-proof me out for the hardware I have. That could spark development of content, because now you have a ready-made market rather than having to wait for product revisions.
And maybe just an open one. Do you see the telcos potentially using that as a strategy then? Bundling headset with the latest. I know Vodafone were rumoured to be doing it for a while.
I've spoken with a couple telcos. I've interacted with them in a couple different places. I don't think anyone's thinking that farther forward. They are telcos.
Interesting.
We,
Thank you for those of you who laughed. You got the joke.
We actually did a telco deal last September with O2 and Telefonica, where we did a sort of light version of the app, and we're in 665 O2 stores across Germany as an in-store experiential app for people's first step into VR. So I think there will be, without saying too much, there'll be plenty of opportunity there.
I think the big broadcast media companies, you look at how many fingers Sky has got its, how many pies it's got its food. Anyway, all sorts of stuff going on. Like they're invested in camera technology. They have a VR app. They sell mobile phones, broadband, your set-top box. They also sell a separate pay-per-view. I mean, I would find it hard not to envisage a world where that kind of model could potentially be a semi kind of gateway to onboarding more people.
Definitely, because I think one of the work, or some of the discussions we've had, particularly with sports companies and rights holders within sports as well, is you look at the Premier League, and it's a relatively complex slice and dice level of cuts, but then you take it to the US and it's a whole different ball game, literally, with regards to rights. But you can almost see how the fact that they've done straight after goals scored, there's a rights for the highlights. Why not have a VR highlights of behind the scenes, locker room, etc. as well?
Well,
so,
BT tried it, didn't they, with the Champions League final? And I don't know what the figures were on that. I'd be quite interested to know. But I think sport's quite. It's a tricky one, going to a lot of sport and being a season ticket holder at a certain club, which I won't name in case it's not favourable. It's difficult, and you must see it in music as well. Sometimes there's nothing quite like being there. And the ability to pick your own seat around the ground. I don't know. I'm quite excited to see someone do something unique, because that's what VR is really good for. Giving you an opportunity to do something you couldn't normally do, because you're not Tim Peake and you're not going into space. You're not Kimi Raikkonen and you're not driving a Formula One car around Monaco, or it's ludicrously expensive. Therefore,
I think I completely agree with Carl on that point. Something that, and we kind of assessed that very early on. So we're not selling you the best seat in the house. We actually sell you a completely unobtainable seat in the house. You're right next to the artist on stage, and then within the app, you can real-time move lead singer, drummer, back of stage, B stage. So yeah, it has to be something that makes someone go, why do I want to do this, rather than just getting a ticket if they can. But also from the sport front of things, we at Melody certainly see that as an ecosystem of VR being incredibly important. But things that are prohibiting that at the moment, it has to be live. We're music. If you watch something a week later, a day later, a month later, a year later, if it's a historic show, music has that value. Sport, if you're watching, even the Champions League, I think it was a 75-second delay on the actual live set-top box. No one wants that. So it's got to be, and again, with the sort of fees that will be being paid between rights holders in sport, we've been privy to a few of the costs that are going to fly around. You need the market size to be 200 million people. You know you're going to have 10 million people tuning into Man U every weekend in order for it ever to be a viable step. But it will certainly come. I just don't think it's next month. It's 18 months, in my opinion.
If I can just on the gaming and mobile more specifically, and from a platform perspective, what we're seeing is like mobile VR, for example. Most of the high quality content is premium nowadays, so it kind of like correlates a lot with the console gaming industry. So generally, we're seeing like maybe a slightly lower pricing than consoles. Well, actually, mobile audience is always a bit more difficult and tough in terms of monetization. But like premium is definitely something like in Daydream, we see that the first quality games are coming in premium, and then other business models. Obviously, in-app purchases is huge in mobile 2D. So in traditional mobile gaming, in-app purchases is kind of like I think it's 80% or 90% of the revenue. So it means that probably at some point it will come into also like some forms of tests, and especially because we integrate also the payment platform within the Daydream. So the experience, you don't have to go out to actually pay for a certain in-app digital good. And then the last thing is subscription is growing a lot in terms of mobile and mobile gaming. So mobile in general, with the likes of Netflix and Amazon that we discussed before, and HBO. But especially like in gaming, partners, they're starting to explore this option also, because they see kind of like a way to avoid frustration on the player, which is something that is many of the users, they complain about when you have to pay for get certain things. And and then advertising is always there, which at some point might come. There's from my point of view, there's some technology barriers, because usually you need to connect with a different server and might be hosted so the creative might be hosted, and then you see the programmatic, how do you embed that into VR? It's going to be like a challenge, but it's a big obviously source of revenues, and here I'm speaking for Google, which it's amazing, basically our main source. So definitely it will come at some point.
Interesting, brilliant, great. Just aware of time, and I've got one final question, which is probably in a whole another debate and almost a whole another session itself. But I suppose it wouldn't be a panel on immersive technology or immersive reality without looking at augmented and mixed as well. And I suppose you get quite a lot of different opinion on this, in terms of, in the future you'll have one headset which you'll be able to flick in and out of, or I've read some feedback from some in the industry which is saying VR will effectively just being engulfed by AR and MR as well. Just throwing it out there, just as a question to anyone who's willing to pick up first as well. Where do you see the position? Do you think almost AR and MR, because almost the easy access to effectively just have your smartphone, there, not even any glasses to begin with, and also as well as the Zapper box, with the Kickstarter project as well. Do you almost see that maybe the hockey curve on that trajectory being quicker than maybe VR in the short term?
I'll be careful about how I answer this question without getting into trouble. I think Ignacio made a good point earlier. You already have a computer in your pocket, regardless of what you put on the end of it. That's way more powerful than you could have imagined when you had a Nokia 3310 playing Snake, right? I think when the iPhone 7S came out, it was faster than that 12-inch MacBook that they brought, and when they benched it. So it's like the power is there. And what you plug into that, if it's You know, it's a Daydream or it's a Gear VR at the moment. Down the line, is it the next version of HoloLens or Oculus are already openly testing their portable version?
Yep.
Samsung make, I don't know what the percentage is for the number of LCD screens, but I think they're one of two LCD manufacturers. So it's like everything, whether mobile is the future thing that enables all of this stuff, it's definitely been the driving force behind advancements of this technology, which has meant prior to military operating with it behind closed doors, it's now more public facing because everybody has access. And one of the things people tend to complain about is, oh, it's not democratized, we can't get access to it. Well, it's access for everyone, but it's like the content thing. So which one's going to be bigger? There'll probably be the different use cases at the moment. At the moment, everyone, you know, when we first started doing VR things, excluding Game of Thrones was the first one we did, we then probably did 3 or 4 car-based VR things because car and technology is at a crossroads. Lots of people tend to have the opinion that HoloLens is more utility-based, but I think part of that is to do with the cost of onboarding that technology and the system integrators that sell that technology to those companies work more in that space. But really, you know, once the barrier of the technology is removed, it won't be about, well, I'm not in the tech space, so I can't have a HoloLens or a VR app. It'll be another medium where you could do anything, you know, I don't know whether it's cooking or whatever it is, it should just be like, you don't think about TV like that, so why would you think about this like that? So, sorry, not a clear answer, one bigger than the other. I think, you know...
It's almost like look at the use case and...
Yeah, I think so, because there's never one, you know, it's like idea or content first, not the piece of technology, and I think that should apply across the board, not just in this space.
Yeah, but maybe very quickly, just before I go, so from
AR, if you want to answer.
But from a development perspective, from your side, do you think VR would be the more like the core focus of what you're doing in terms of entertainment?
I mean, possibly. I mean, you think like we've worked on the Harry Potter franchise for age, and actually we did one of the launch pieces of content for Daydream. So, you know, we have the assets. We have, you know, Hogwarts, or we have the inside of the ISS space. So we have the things. You know, VR is putting you in a virtual world. AR is bringing elements into your real world. So we have those digital virtual worlds for the IPs we've worked on. So for now, yes.
Great, thanks. Scott, maybe.
It's a smooth progression, right? I mean, you go from overlaying informational content on what you see, whether you're doing that with a mobile or whether you're doing that with glasses or something like that. And as you dial up that immersion factor, it goes to full black and opaque, where I'm immersed in some other reality. It's going to be just like we've seen with TV, where people are device agile, and they'll move content from small screen to radio to large screen to medium screen to PC. And I just did that all last night watching the Warriors game. You know, I watched it on 4 different devices for the span of one game. We're going to see the same thing with different types of reality. And so what content has to think about, how do I go from flat to full?
And in my opinion, I'm particularly excited with AR and embedding AR into VR. So Tango project, and this is now that the technology was announced. It was announced at I/O was the WorldSense. So. So I think I had a discussion once, and there was a session from Noah Falstein, who is a kind of like a game legend, and he works for Google, and he was explaining us, at some point we will see like you are in a room and you are transforming your sofa will become a rock, and maybe your mom will become, or your family will become like part of the game itself. So you will incorporate that, and you will transform the reality, and you will be actually in VR. But adopting things, adjusting the reality that surrounds you. So you can move freely, and you will never go into the sofa because it's a rock, and why would you go there? So anyway, so it's kind of like that mixed reality, call it whatever you want, like, I don't know. But that is particularly exciting in terms of like, if you think about gaming and the possibilities of just like moving freely around this room and playing.
Very interesting. Stephen, any final comments?
Yeah, just a quick one. I think we all more or less share the same opinion. I certainly think it's a progressive step. We've all talked about the fact that we've basically got a VR device in our pocket. You know, there's 1.43 billion smartphones in the world currently on contract, and seeing things like the Samsung S8 coming with the headset. I think for us, from a music standpoint, it's amazing standing on stage with Justin Bieber. It's even more amazing him being in your front room performing for you. But I think as certainly in my opinion, I think as a mainstream consumer adopted technology, AR is a little way out for it to be a really compelling, incredible experience, but I think it will be a natural journey through all of those realities in essence.
Great. Thanks very much, guys. Well, I've left a couple of minutes for questions, so I'd like at this point just to open it up and see if there's any questions from the audience. We've got one there.
Hi there, thanks. It was really, really interesting. Just, we've spoken a little bit about some of the barriers then, and I think all of you have picked up on it in terms of the user experience and price being a really big issue, as well as perhaps there not being enough unique content out there. Just wondering, do we need for just to get over that tipping point as well, do we need technology brands to either make sure that they're having long-term brand partnerships with entertainment brands, whether that be in the sports world or say film or music, so over a long period of time, so consumers know that regularly they can see, I don't know, behind the scenes content of Star Wars, or what it's like in the Real Madrid dressing room or something like that? Or do we need another brand such as Apple to enter that sort of space to make VR seem, perhaps a little bit cooler and maybe more accessible? And that's no offense to Google at all.
No comments on that.
I'll grab that one if that's all right. And then
Yeah.
I think there's two questions there which are good ones. On the first one, in terms of, do I want to commit to Oculus because I know that I'll always be able to see the Game of Thrones franchise in VR? I think you look at learnings from the game sector where people don't think anything about spending £60, £70 on a title. They quite look forward to that and like to play lots of things. It is pretty normal to hold an exclusive window. I think I think just at the moment though, the technology is moving so quickly. I probably wouldn't necessarily recommend anyone to pick one particular device. I have a favourite. And I think the Vive's interesting because it evolves every month with new little bolt-ons and add-ons. But to your point about Apple, I think it's, I can't really, they're already doing stuff, right? The launch of, their AR kit is just a stepping stone to where they're going. But I think, I don't know how many people here had a Palm Pilot, but I can guarantee that probably 60 to 70%, if not more, have an iPad or some kind of tablet device, which really you've got because Apple did it, So maybe that will be a Kickstarter thing. But again, it's still, the content was there and the access was there and the networks were there when they launched iPads. So perhaps, content again, hand in hand, really, I think.
Yeah, the consumer's never been more fickle. We just saw the growth of plug-in sticks, Roku sticks, and so on. And when the consumer sees a better mousetrap, their replacement cycle can be 6 months or a year, and it can totally transform the industry. So unlocking to anything on hardware to me seems like a bad move on a content.
Well, the jump on that is because they can stream stuff for free, isn't it? Being slightly, pessimistic,
Great. Thanks. One question? Any other questions from? No. In that case then, well, thanks very much for listening. I hope you found it very useful. And finally, can we just thank my panelists? Thank you.
Cheers, Carl and team.